All right, let's dive in. Today we're looking at the silent twins.
Oh, this is a fascinating one.
It is. It is. We've
Yeah.
got this 1993 article from Psychiatry Bulletin.
Okay.
It's a British medical journal, and it kind of lays out like the whole story of these twins who, get this, they only spoke to each other.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a wild story, and it doesn't have a happy ending, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So we're going to try to unpack like what exactly happened to them,
Right.
why they might have done what they did, and then like maybe talk about some of the bigger questions that this case raises, about mental health and all that.
Yeah, I think what's especially interesting about this case is how it makes you think about the way we define and treat mental health.
Yeah.
It's not so simple, right? You can't just snap a label on it.
Right.
It's about the power of this bond they had, the impact of being isolated, and the ethical problems that come up when you try to help people in such a unique situation.
Absolutely, yeah. Imagine living in a world where, like, the only person you talk to is your twin. That's what these twins did. Like, starting from when they were, like, 2 or 3 years old.
Wow.
They just shut out the whole world.
It's hard to even fathom that.
Right. It's wild. And, like, as you can guess, that led to a lot of issues for them,
Yeah.
especially as they got older.
Yeah, the article mentions they had a really tough time in school.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine trying to learn and socialize when you refuse to talk to anyone except your twin.
Yeah.
It's not a surprise that their teenage years were, well, let's just say they were a bit rough.
Yeah, a bit more than rough. Things took a really dark turn at the end of 1981.
Oh.
They were involved in a bunch of arson cases.
Arson.
Yeah, they set fire to, like, several empty buildings, which obviously landed them in Broadmoor.
Broadmoor.
Yeah, it's that high-security psychiatric hospital in England.
Oh, wow.
Intense, right? So these young women who had lived in their own little world are suddenly thrown into this incredibly restrictive environment.
That's a huge change.
Right, like, not only are they dealing with the consequences of what they did, but now they're also stuck in a system that, like, probably wasn't prepared to understand, let alone treat their unique situation.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And the article talks about how challenging it was for everyone involved.
Right.
So at first, the doctors thought they might have a personality disorder or maybe a psychopathic disorder.
Mm.
But then a mental health review tribunal came along and was like, nope, it's just mental illness.
So even the professionals weren't sure what to make of it.
Exactly. It makes you wonder, did they really understand the depth of these twins' bond and how that might have played a role in their actions?
Yeah.
Or were they just trying to label them because they didn't know what else to do?
Right, trying to fit them into a box that maybe didn't quite fit.
Exactly. And it makes you think, like, maybe if they tried a different approach, one that recognized how connected these twins were, maybe things would have turned out differently.
That's the question that's going to keep coming up as we go through.
For sure.
Yeah.
So they're in Broadmoor, this pretty serious place.
Right.
And then in 1983, they're put on this medication called a neuroleptic, which, from what I understand, is usually used to treat, like, psychosis.
Okay.
The article also mentions that they tried separating the twins, like encouraging them to live more independently.
Right.
And here's where things get really interesting and kind of heartbreaking. Actually,
Whoa.
their condition actually starts to improve.
It's like there's a little bit of hope.
Right, like maybe they were finally figuring out how to navigate the world, even in that restrictive environment.
Yeah.
And then by March of 93, they were doing so well that they were transferred to Caswell Clinic.
Caswell Clinic?
Yeah, it's a medium secure unit in Wales. So things were looking up, they were moving to a less restrictive place. It seemed like things might actually get better for them.
And yet, that's not quite how it ends, is it?
Nope.
No.
Not at all.
We'll talk about that after the break.
Yeah, it's almost like, you start to think, oh, maybe things are going to be okay for them.
Oh, right. There's a little bit of light.
And then, boom,
Yeah.
tragedy.
It really is tragic, and what makes it even more mysterious is how it all happened. So suddenly it wasn't a slow decline or anything. It was just, bam, out of nowhere.
Yeah.
It really makes you think, could this have been prevented?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the article says one of the twins, she was having, like, some mild flu symptoms, nothing too serious.
Okay.
And she was a bit anxious about the transfer, which makes sense.
Sure.
But right when they get to Caswell Clinic, she collapses.
Oh, no.
And then just a few hours later, she passes away at a hospital nearby.
That's awful.
It's really sad. And then the autopsy shows she died from acute myocarditis.
Acute myocarditis.
Yeah, it's basically a massive inflammation of the heart muscle. And this is where things get a little complicated, medically speaking. So the article throws out, like, 3 possible causes.
Mm-hmm.
A viral infection, a bad reaction to the medication she'd been on for years, or something else entirely. But wouldn't the doctors have been able to, like, pinpoint what it was?
You'd think so, but it wasn't that easy. The inquest into her death, it was a big deal.
Oh, wow.
Lawyers, tons of press, the whole 9 yards. And a senior lecturer in forensic pathology, he testified that the inflammation in her heart, it was so severe and it happened so fast
Wow.
that honestly, she probably wouldn't have survived no matter what caused it.
So even if they had cut it earlier, it might not have made a difference?
That's what the pathologists seem to be saying, yeah. And to make things even more confusing, he also said this kind of acute myocarditis you usually see it in, like young men who collapse during intense physical activity.
Which obviously doesn't really fit with one of the twins who was feeling sick and had just been on a long trip.
Exactly.
So what about the medication? Could it have been a reaction to that?
Well, the pathologist did consider that, especially since she had been taking it for 8 years without any issues.
Mm.
But ultimately, the inquest couldn't say for sure what caused her death. It's like they hit a dead end.
So they just left it as, like, an unsolved mystery.
Pretty much. The jury had to choose between misadventure, which would mean it was a weird reaction to the drugs,
Yeah.
or natural causes if it was a virus or something else completely.
Right.
They could also add what's called a writer if they thought there was any negligence involved.
Huh.
But in the end, they went with natural causes, no writer.
So officially, case closed.
Yep.
But it doesn't really answer what happened, does it?
Not really.
And all those ethical questions about their lives and how they were treated, those are still up in the air.
You're right. This whole case, it raises some massive questions about what we really know about mental health.
It's true.
It makes you think about just how complex the human mind is
Yeah.
and about the ethical dilemmas we run into when we're trying to treat conditions that are just as unique as the people who experience them.
And then there's the surviving twin.
Right.
She's still at Caswell after her sister dies.
It's hard to imagine what that must have been like for her.
It's heartbreaking. They were inseparable their entire lives, and then suddenly she's alone.
They were separated a few times at Broadmoor, remember?
Right.
But this time, it was permanent.
Totally different. Makes you wonder, did losing her sister finally break that silence they'd built around themselves? Like, did it force her to find new ways to communicate, to connect with the world?
It's a really powerful question. Sadly, this article from '93 doesn't tell us what happened to her after all of this.
Right.
But the fact that we're still talking about their story all these years later shows just how much it resonated with people.
Yeah, it's really stuck with people.
And it reminds us that even with all the progress we've made in medicine and psychology, some mysteries just might never be fully understood.
Yeah.
The Silent Twins, their case, it challenges us to confront our assumptions about mental health, to appreciate the power of human connection,
Yeah.
and to recognize that sometimes, no matter how hard we try, some questions simply remain unanswered.
Well said. So we've gone through, like, all the facts of the case, right?
Right.
And looked at the different theories and even, like, dove into the whole medical mystery of how one of the twins died.
Yeah.
But as we're, wrapping up our deep dive here,
Right.
I keep coming back to this one question.
What's that?
What does it all mean?
It's the question that just hangs there, isn't it?
It really does.
The Silent Twins, they weren't just some, like, medical anomaly or sad news story,
Right.
Their case makes us really think about some fundamental questions, like how do we even understand and treat mental illness, especially when it shows up in ways that are so hard to categorize.
It's like their silence itself is just this giant question mark over everything.
Yeah.
Was it a symptom of something deeper? Was it their way of coping? Was it some kind of rebellion? Or maybe was it like a language only they understood?
A secret language.
Right. The article doesn't really give us a straight answer, and I think
Yeah.
that's part of what makes this whole case so fascinating but also so disturbing.
It challenges us to rethink what normal even is. And it reminds us that we still have so much to learn about the human mind.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have that whole question of choice, right?
Choice.
Like, did they choose to be silent? Or was it something they couldn't control? And if it was a choice, what were they trying to do? Were they protecting themselves, protecting each other?
Right.
Were they, like, trying to create a world where only they existed?
Those are questions we can really only guess at.
Yeah.
But it shows how complicated human behavior can be
For sure.
and how tough it can be to actually help people when you're dealing with such a unique situation.
And the article makes you think about the limitations of, like, those traditional psychiatric diagnoses,
Oh, right.
Like, did labels like personality disorder or psychopathic disorder or even just mental illness,
Yeah.
did those even really capture what was going on with these twins?
It makes you wonder.
Or were they just trying to fit them into boxes that didn't really apply?
I think that's a really good point. Maybe those labels actually kept people from understanding that unique connection they had
Right.
and how important that connection was to them.
It's like maybe they were so focused on the labels that they missed the actual people, you know?
Yeah, you lose sight of the individual.
Exactly. And that brings us to another big thing. The whole ethical side of how they were treated.
Yeah, the
I think was
ethics.
separating them, even if it was meant to help them grow as individuals. Was that the right thing to do?
It's a tough one.
Could that separation have, like, contributed to what happened?
It's such a difficult situation, right? On the one hand, you want to encourage independence, help them become their own people.
Right.
But on the other hand, messing with a bond as deep as theirs, it could have terrible consequences. And I think we saw that in this case.
Yeah, it's a real cautionary tale, you know? Like, even when you have the best intentions, interventions can have unintended consequences.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Silent Twins, what are the big takeaways? Like, what can we learn from this story beyond all the sad details?
I think there are a few key points to remember.
Okay.
First, we have to approach mental health with humility and an open mind.
Hmm.
We can't just try to shove people into neat categories.
Yeah.
We have to try to understand the unique experiences that shape them.
It's about seeing the person, not the label.
Exactly. Second, this case really shows the ethical challenges we face when we're trying to treat conditions that are so hard to define and even harder to treat.
It's true.
We have to constantly be thinking, weighing the potential benefits against the risks,
Right.
and recognizing that there's no one solution that works for everyone.
Absolutely.
Eh.
And lastly, I think this case is a really powerful reminder of just how mysterious human connection can be.
Absolutely.
Silent twins and their silence. It might always be an enigma,
Yeah.
but it makes us think about all the ways we communicate with each other,
You're right.
how we connect, how we influence each other's lives, both in good ways and bad.
Beautifully put. It's a story that stays with you.
It really does. So as we close this chapter on the Silent Twins, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay.
What if we could go back in time and give them a different kind of support, a different approach? Could we have changed their tragic fate?
Wow.
Or was their story, with all its complexity and sadness, was it just inevitable?
It's a question without a clear answer,
Yeah,
but it's a question worth asking as we continue to learn and try to understand mental health better.
well said. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of the Silent Twins. We hope you found it as thought-provoking as we did.
I did.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep your minds open to all the mysteries of being human.